Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our National TPP call. Tonight we are going to be talking about TPP, TTIP, and regulatory cooperation, or the pro-corporate attack on our public interest laws. Our speakers tonight are going to be Sharon Treat, a former Maine state legislator, Mahandra Rodriguez, a Peruvian climate justice activist, Nancy Price, Emily Ann Sladen, Elizabeth Warren, Adam Weitzman, and Mara Cohen. And as we go through their presentations, our guests will all be introduced. You'll find out a little more about their background. But first, some basics. For those of you who have been on these calls for a while, you'll know that I'm Andrea Miller. I'm the Executive Director of People Demanding Action, and I'm going to go over some of the call norms right now. Our opening slide basically explained the audio is phone only. You must call in. And I know my team will be entering the number in the chat box, 605-562-3140. And then the PIN is 951146#. We also ask people, I know the meeting room allows you to use your video camera. Do not turn on your video camera. Some of the people who are in the meeting room have very low bandwidth, and if we run the video cameras, that really makes it hard for them to see when I move from one slide to the next. Now, all calls are recorded, and when this call is done, a link will be posted both on our Facebook page, which will be provided later, and also on the down section of the People Demanding Action website. Right now, you are Q&A that eliminates background noise. It's everyone. We get a real high-quality recording. There will be several opportunities to ask questions on this call. And then we are in Q&A time. I will remind you to press *6 to be added to the queue. And we're going to ask everyone, please, when you are asking a question, do so. Ask the question as opposed to becoming one of our speakers and making a long statement. We have a lot of speakers tonight, and there's a lot of information on this call. People that are in the chat room, we're going to ask you to keep the chat room discussions on topic, and please keep it professional. The audio number, the dial-in, and the access code are displayed for you. If you wish to download a copy of this PowerPoint, you can click the share button, which is at the bottom right of the screen. It is right below the member listing. You may go there. And not only will this PowerPoint be available for download, but PowerPoints from previous calls will also be available. After the call, you can use the link that is here, peopledemandingaction.org, in the download section in the TPP folder. We create a new folder for every call and put the PowerPoint links to the audio for the call and other information that provided call will be in that folder. You may return to the download section at any time and download the information. There are a lot of people that make these calls possible. Our technical advisor and Facebook page manager is Tom Hopking. Tom is with Move On in Pennsylvania. We're displaying his email address if you need to connect with Tom. Tom's available for pre- and post-call technical questions, and our Facebook page is given at the bottom, www.facebook.com/groups/global TPP Team. We have a very extensive call planning team. Harriet Haywood is on our call planning team. Harriet Haywood will be announcing our special guest speaker for tonight. She is the call coordinator. She is also the Florida State leader for People Demanding Action. Our chat hosts are, and part of our call planning team, Lisa Oldendorf, Move On New York, and we also, Linda Bruder is in the chat room. She's part of the call planning team, and she is with Move On Washington State. Now, hopefully Emily Ann has been able to join us. Emily Ann, are you on the line to talk about our Twitter storm?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Okay, great. So this is the Twitter address for TPP Media March, and the tweets are found on the PD America website at this web address on the bottom, tiny.cc/TPP Media March. Next slide, please. So we have our, if you don't know what a Twitter storm is, it's really fun. It's when we all gather together on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, and we all tweet together. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the invite for this week's storm. I'll show you how you can share it. Just go to this web address, tiny.cc/TPP Media March. Next slide, please. And you can just, when you go to the PD America website page, you'll see exactly this. So you can just click and drag the image onto your desktop, and then you can tweet that or share it on Facebook, create a post on Facebook. So then on Tuesday at storm time, all you do is you see the tweet list below here, below the image. There's a list of tweets. You can just copy each tweet by highlighting it, and each tweet contains an educational link or a call to action. These are great ways to share information on social media and help raise awareness with new people each week. Next slide, please. So all we're doing is highlighting the tweet and then pasting it into the tweet, into your tweet box, and then press tweet. Next slide, please. So, people started asking me questions, and I really encourage this because it's so hard on the call to really have to connect and to really understand how I can help you the most to participate in the storms and any questions you might have. So this week I got a question. I have a really old Mac laptop, and I bought an iPad. How can I participate in the Twitter storm on an iPad or a smartphone? This is a great question. Next slide, please. And this is the easiest way to participate in the Twitter storm. All you do is when you go to TPP Media March on Twitter, this is what you'll see. So if you'd like to receive updates, you can go ahead and follow me here on this page. Next slide, please. But during the storm, I will have all the tweets we'll be posting one by one. All you have to do on your iPad or iPhone is just click retweet. See where these little pink circles are? That's just retweet. Just click that, retweet, and then you are participating in the storm, and it's just super easy and fun, and you don't even have to be home. You can do it anywhere. You can do it if you're standing in line in the grocery store. Next slide, please. So storm with us to stop TPP. We are becoming quite an army on social media, and it's fun, and I look forward to Tuesday night, and you will too. So please join us. Thank you so much. Thank you, Emily Ann.
Mahendra, are you with us?
Hi, yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Lovely. Welcome. We have hopefully two very, very special guests that are going to be joining us. Adam, are you on the line? If you're on the line, I would love for you to introduce your guest.
Sure. Can you hear me?
We hear you fine.
Great. So many of you know from our call last week that this on the 22nd there was a International Day of Action in Peru, Chile, and Argentina, protesting TPP and protesting Monsanto, one of the companies that stands to benefit most from TPP at our expense. So we have two activists from Peru who are going to report to us on this three-nation Day of Action. We also had a little solidarity event in New York, and I guess you could say in a small way, Forest City Day of Action, the Forest Country Day of Action. So our guests are Mahendra Rodriguez, who's an anthropologist, educator, and activist from Peru. She's a climate justice activist who took part in the Peruvian delegation at the Global Power Shift in Turkey in 2013. She is a young feminist fellow for climate justice who works with the Women's Environment and Development Organization and an activist with the Tierra Activista, Peruvian Activist Collective, and National Network that works towards system change, not climate change. Our second guest, do we have a slide for our second guest, Andrea? Great.
Of course we do.
Our second guest, Jose Saldana, is a Peruvian activist, researcher, and professor of law. He'll be speaking about the last of the most recent march in Peru and the role of musicians and upcoming activities. He's active with social organizations, including Zona 7 and Tierra y Libertad. So, and that's a very truncated version of both of their bios for those of you who are in audio only. So be sure to check out the slides after the fact. Lots of interesting info on these guests. And as they're speaking, we're going to be showing just some of the photographs from these exciting actions that took place on the 22nd. So with that, I'll turn it over to our guests. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Hi, well, my name is Mahendra, and I live here in Lima. We participated in the rally last Friday on the 22nd here in Lima, where we were between, I would say, probably around 700 people. This is the third rally that's been held in Lima so far on the issue of the TPP. The numbers are definitely growing from rally to rally, and we're hoping to have much, much more people on February 4th. There were simultaneously 10 rallies, marches, demonstrations in 10 different cities, in over 10 different cities actually, within Peru. So that includes cities in rural areas, in the Andes, and in the Amazon. There wasn't much of press coverage, but there's definitely much more compared to the previous two marches that had absolutely no press coverage, mainstream press coverage. And this time we did manage to get some articles in the Maine, some very brief articles in the main media outlets here in Peru. We also had a press conference on Wednesday that helped us sort of get the ball rolling on that. In Chile, at the same time, there were demonstrations in 11 cities in the country. I understand that the one in Santiago had over 1,500 people. And in Argentina, there were 3 events held with over 1,000 people in Buenos Aires. And I think it's important to acknowledge that though Argentina isn't a part of the TPP, the president Macri has still sort of said that he's very interested in joining the alliance, and Argentina is also protesting and has been protesting for the last 3 years against a Monsanto glyphosate plant in Argentina, and so that's sort of like an ongoing national issue, and they've managed to connect both the TPP demonstrations and this ongoing protest against the Monsanto factory, so definitely linking TPP to the UPOV 91 and the Monsanto law. That's particularly relevant in Latin America given our context and high percentage of the population that is dedicated to agriculture and to peasant farming, who definitely, relies on ancestral practices of saving seeds and exchanging seeds, and in the face of the Monsanto law basically threatens this livelihood. So that's sort of it's a very brief summary of what happened here last Friday in 3 different countries here in South America. Definitely the next event is planned for February 4th, which is when our presidents at least the Peruvian president is going to sign, in theory, the TPP in New Zealand for it to then pass on to debate within the Peruvian Congress. And so we're definitely running to keep the momentum coming, to keep the momentum going, and to make sure that people are on the streets on February 4th. And also definitely focusing on maintaining the decentralized nature of this, so that it's not just in the capital cities, but also in rural areas and also in the Andes and the Amazon and other regions that are going to be affected by the TPP and where the majority of our countries live. So definitely that's the aim. That's where we're headed. And again, it's a really, really brief summary of what happened. I don't know if you have any questions, but yeah.
We'll take the questions a little bit later on.
Sounds good.
So, Jose?
I think he might have had some problems connecting. So if he's not online now, I don't know if there will be a brief moment a little bit later on once he gets his Skype credit figured out. I don't know if that's an option.
He says that he's in. He says he's signed in the chat. Let me, I'll see if,
he's in the meeting room.
He's in the meeting room, but I think when he calls, he can't hear anything, so he has an audio issue.
Okay, I'll try and work with him with that offline.
Thanks.
Right, and we will be happy to come back to Jose. So we will work it out.
Okay.
All right. Adam, I want to bring you up for a moment to go over some events, the news stories. Adam Weissman is part of our call planning team. He's with Trade Justice and also Global Justice for Animals and the Environment. Adam does speaker recruitment for us. He does events, news stories, and actions. You can follow up and get information about the events. He lives at tradejustice.net/events, and you can follow up and get working links and read the news stories he goes over at tradejustice.net/news.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Am I muted?
No, we hear you, Adam.
Okay, great. So a couple upcoming events. This pretty packed week this week. Starting this Tuesday, our friends at Food and Water Watch are holding a national conference call called What's Next for the TPP. The guest will be Patrick Woodall, who's their research director and senior policy advocate. That is 8 o'clock in the Eastern Time Zone, 5 o'clock Pacific. Then on Thursday in New York State, on Long Island, there will be a panel event called The TPP, How It Would Affect Long Island and Why We Should Derail It. And for those of you who are not in New York, we're going to be live streaming that event at stopmotionsolo.tv. And if you follow the link on the events page, that'll take you to the link with that details on both the how to attend in person and how to follow the live stream. Then this Sunday, I guess that shortly right before our call, I'm going to be doing an interview on the Progressive News Network Internet Radio show. It lists 7 to 9, but that's the program time. My interview will be over by the time of our call, of course. So that's this Sunday. And we'll be hearing about lots more upcoming events as the call goes along. But again, for all of those events, go to tradejustice.net/events. And now we can move to the next slide. Great. So the National TPP Team are the folks who organize these calls. That's what we call ourselves for now. We're looking for a new name. We'll have one soon. However, in order to make these calls happen, we need your help. There are 2 committees that work on these calls. One of them is our call planning team, and the other is our call, outreach, and publicity team. If you would like to be involved in either of these teams, the call planning team is the group that finds the speakers, chooses the topics for the calls, makes the timelines for these calls, assembles a lot of the content, helps turn the bullet points and photos that our speakers submit into slides, sometimes collects images to have accompaniment for what our speakers are putting together. The call outreach and publicity team are the people who actually help get the word out about these calls so that we can build and expand the audience of these calls. So we need volunteers for both of these teams. Both of them have phone conferences to do planning, and if you would like to be part of these teams, shoot me an email at adam@tradejustice.net, and I will let you know about how you can join these teams and help to build these calls, build the audience, and help book speakers so we have great informative content to give us the resources that we need to grow this movement and stop TPP. Again, that's adam@tradejustice.net. Next slide. Okay, on to some of our news stories. Now, this week, because we have a long call, a call with lots of packed speakers, I'm keeping the news update short, but there are many times this number of news stories. If you go to tradejustice.net/news, you will find lots more news stories this week. This is a packed week of news stories. It was frankly painful to cut down to just this few, so please go online to check out some of those other stories. A lot of big news this week. New analysis of TPP by economists finds that 450,000 U.S. jobs, 75,000 Japanese jobs, and 58,000 Canadian jobs are at risk. The Atlantic ran a story about asking why TPP has special labor side agreements for some of the countries in this agreement, but not some of the others that continue to have troubling labor policies. The preparing for the TPP signing in New Zealand, New Zealand police are receiving special riot training, which really says something about the undemocratic nature of this agreement, that they're anticipating that the populace will be so enraged that they have to suppress riots to move ahead this trade agreement. The Japanese chief TPP negotiator is being accused of taking a $100,000 bribe. The 12 TPP countries are going to be discussing expanding TPP to more nations. We've all heard about some of the nations that have been talked about as potential expansion countries, including Taiwan, South Korea, the Philippines. Well, that expansion is back on the table, and with the signing coming up, they're looking to bring more countries into this deal down the line. There are real concerns in New Zealand about the TPP signing and that being disrespectful to the indigenous people of New Zealand, how the signing date coincides closely with the date that the indigenous people signed a treaty with the British that they argued did not, in fact, lead to the, in their view, the ceding of their sovereignty, and there's a perspective that TPP is, in fact, ceding sovereignty. In Malaysia, there were mass protests against TPP, so really this has been a global week of action against TPP. Again, there are many more news stories that I was not able to get to, so please go to tradejustice.net/news and check the news headlines for January 24th for lots more stories, and thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Adam. Thank you very much. Now I want to bring up Nancy Price. Nancy has joined us for many, many calls in the past. She is co-chair of the Alliance for Democracy, a board member of Liberty Street Foundation and Global Climate Convergence. Nancy works on many, many issues. She has been our champion working on TPP free zones. Nancy.
Yes, hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being on the call. It's a pleasure to bring you up to date on what's happening with no TPP resolutions. This is the Alliance for Democracy first started out, as you know, back in the late 1990s on multilateral agreement on investment resolutions. So this is really a continuation of how doing local
city, county, and state resolutions can help not only educate people, but to build the momentum to defeat the TPP. The MAI was defeated. We can defeat the TPP. Right now, we're working with the AFL-CIO and the Sierra Club to pass these resolutions. There are many in progress. You can go to www.tppfreezones.org, where we're now beginning to put in place yellow pins for resolutions in progress. The whole suite of, we hope, as many as 100 or more resolutions will be announced when it's an opportune moment, but I'd like to just tell you now some that are in progress: Tampa, Florida; Cambridge, Massachusetts; Englewood, Colorado; Duluth, Minnesota; Burlington, Vermont, and there's a resolution before the state legislature in Tennessee. I believe that New Jersey and New York and Massachusetts and New York State are also working on resolutions. But I can perhaps on the next call or the following week give you a much more thorough update. But in any event, if you go to www.tppfreezones, you can read our model resolution. You can read resolutions that have been passed by other by cities, and I recommend that Richmond, California's 2 resolutions are excellent models to follow. Next slide, please. So we have good resources at the website, as I've mentioned, but most importantly, I want to stress how, if you're going to work at the city or county level, to pull in working with your local allies, seniors, environmental groups, local trade councils, any of the groups that you can reach out to. Women's International League for Peace and Freedom is very involved in this work as well. You can work with local branches of that group, but it's good to work in coalitions so you can bring strength to your meetings with local city council members or county supervisors. It's important to do the background work so that you know going into making a presentation at the city council or county council that you've really got the support you need to, if not get a majority vote, to get a unanimous vote on these resolutions. Keeping in mind that these are non-binding resolutions, but if they pass unanimously, that gives a voice to the local population. I want to stress that the New York City resolution being passed unanimously gave voice to 8 million people. And so whereas we talk about getting 100 resolutions passed, you can see that that adds up in the number of not only communities and counties or maybe states being represented, but the number of people can add up into the millions. Next slide, please. I want to really stress that it's very important to link the impact of the TPP on climate and the producing increasing global warming and contributing to climate chaos. I recommend reading the 7 Wrinkles in the Paris Climate Deal. You'll see the website, the link to the Carbon Dreams article here, because the seventh point that the author Oscar Reyes describes is carbon pollution from international shipping and international flights does not count in the calculation of greenhouse gas emissions in the Paris Agreement. He comments that emissions from international flights are on course to triple by 2050 and shipping emissions to quadruple. So, of course, if many jobs are offshored, if manufacturing is offshored, if U.S. Carbon fuels, including oil and gas fracking, is exported to the Pacific countries, then we're going to have an incredible increase of carbon footprint and the consequences of further global warming and climate chaos. So we must link the TPP to the climate issue. I want to call your attention to posters that are on our website, www.thealliancefordemocracy.org, that you can use for the February 4th event. Let's add your city or county in there, a TPP-free zone, and the TPP equals climate chaos. These can be downloaded, or you can certainly make these by hand and make them more colorful and more interesting for the February 4th events. But let's really get out this message on local TPP-free zones and the impact of the TPP to climate. I think that's my last slide, is it? Let's see.
Yes, it is, Nancy.
Yeah, good. Okay, so I think in 2 weeks I can perhaps give a more thorough update, having consulted with my AFL-CIO partner, who wasn't available to give me an update today. So thank you very much, and I will give you my email if you wish to email for any questions on strategy or how to move forward at the local or county or state level. I meant to include it here, but sorry I didn't. It's Nancy T. Price 39@gmail.com. I'll give you my phone number in Davis, California. It's 530-758-0726. So let's move forward this particular tactic for defeating the TPP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. And what we're going to do now is we are going to have a very brief question and answer for Nancy, Adam, Mahendra, and Jose may have been able to join us. If you have a question, please press *6 on your phone, and that will add you to the queue. *6 if you have any questions for any of our previous speakers.
And Andrea, Jose has messaged me that he is indeed was indeed able to join us and is on the line with us now.
Oh, well, Jose, please join us.
Jose, can you hear us? Oh, well, maybe there's still issues. I'll figure it out.
All righty. Well, all my speakers, you have done a phenomenal job because at this point, I don't have any questions in the queue. So, excellent job, speakers. Excellent job. Harriet, would you be kind enough to introduce Sharon Treat?
I'd be happy to. Thanks, Andrea. I would like to welcome Sharon Treat tonight. She is a lawyer and former Maine state legislator where she served 11 terms, holding leadership positions that included Senate Majority Leader and chairing many committees, including the Environment and Natural Resources and Health and Human Services Committees. Sharon Treat is a member of the Intergovernmental Policy Advisory Committee in the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative and of the Maine Citizen Trade Policy Commission, which she chaired in 2013 to 14. Sharon Treat has presented several times to negotiators of the TPP and TTIP on access to health care, tobacco policy, and environmental protections. And she has represented the Maine Citizen Trade Policy Commission in hearings held by the USTR on TTIP and on intellectual property and on pharmaceuticals. Ms. Treat has practiced law with the Natural Resources Council of Maine, as well as in state government and private practice. She has taught environmental law and toxic torts at several colleges and University of Maine Law Street. She has Law School. She has an AB degree from Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, and she graduated with honors from Georgetown University Law Center. Welcome, Sharon Treat. You have the floor.
Sharon, we're not hearing you.
Sharon, is your phone on mute?
All right, you're hearing us. Sharon, did you call in using Sharon, just press *6, and then I'll find you, and if I've got you muted, I will unmute you. So *6, and I should be able to see you. Although if you use our special speaker pin, you should be unmuted. And I don't think our queue is working tonight.
Andrea, this is Liz, and I can actually see the queue. I have it open, so if you would like me to help, if Sharon is actually in the meeting room, she could maybe just type in her prefix. I can find her and unmute her manually.
Yep. Of people say they wanted to ask questions and they just didn't show up.
Okay, Andrea, I can see a whole bunch of names in the meeting room queue, so if it is working, and I'm going to go ahead and hit refresh, and I sent a note to Sharon in the inbox asking her to please press
Sharon, try talking now. I think I found you and unmuted you. Liz, try the number right below Mara's.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's near the top. Sharon called in early.
Okay, she should be unmuted. Yeah, oh, she just muted herself, I think. Okay. All right, Sharon should be unmuted. I just checked her in the active speakers box. Sharon, can you hear us? If so, say hello. And check your own phone's mute button because you are unmuted in the console.
This is Beatty Parker, and I keep being muted and unmuted, so I don't know what that
okay.
means to
All right.
Sharon.
Okay. So you called in with a similar prefix. Okay. Thank you so much for alerting us. Okay, we have to find another one with the 207 prefix. Okay. So bear with us on our technological journey, everybody. There's nobody between them on my screen, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute the one that's right above Adam because that's the 207.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes,
okay.
We can hear you. That was the right
one. Sorry, I really computer stuff. I was kicked off this call 3 times, by the way, so I was way down on the list. But anyway, could we have the next slide? I'm sure you've seen my bio long enough now. Shockingly, there's now 83 people on the line instead of 81, so we didn't lose too many people. So thank you so much for having me on this call. I'm going to talk about a kind of a wonky thing, but it goes to the heart of democracy and what we care about. If you could go to the next slide, please. So we've been talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and everybody now knows that's pending in Congress. But there's another trade deal that's being negotiated at the same time, and that's with the European Union. It's called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. It's called either TAFTA or TTIP for short. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well as the TPP, because there's some provisions in both of these agreements that are of great concern, and they're kind of really playing out, particularly in this European agreement, which is very much focused on essentially attacking regulations and getting rid of them. I mean, that is the goal long term. And there's bits of this in the TPP as well that we should be concerned about. So next slide, please. Okay, let's skip over this slide and just go straight to the presentation. Next slide. Okay, so if you go to find out what the U.S. says is regulatory coherence and cooperation, you can't actually find it because their materials are top secret. As we know, everything's negotiated in secret. You can find a fact sheet that they've posted, and this is pretty much all it says. It sounds like a lot of pablum: good regulatory practices, mechanisms for future progress, evidence-based decision-making. What does it all mean? Well, actually, these are all code words for things, some of which aren't actually so good government-y or good. And we're going to see what those mean. Next slide. So if you go to the European Union, where they've been working on this issue, they've really elevated this issue of regulatory cooperation to the same level as ISDS in the European Union. People know what it is. They're starting to be very concerned about it. So the European Consumer Organization says regulatory cooperation is a surreal institutionalization of lobbying. Okay? That's how they define it, and I would agree with that. It puts into place ways in the future where large corporations can basically keep their hand in the regulatory process into the future in a way that's very similar to how they're influencing the negotiations themselves, which is to say not really in the democratic forums that we have in our legislatures, but really in the closed-door forums of committees and sort of backroom dealing. Next slide. The EU folks are really great coming up with these infographics. We could do even better. And here's another group, Corporate Europe Observatory. They say, what's regulatory cooperation? It's a corporate lobbying paradise. It helps corporations tango up regulations they dislike. And here you have sort of the board game from hell. Every which way your regulation is being stopped. And let's pause for a moment to say, what are regulations? Regulations are things that protect people. They protect children from toxic toys. They protect, bees from being killed by pesticides. They protect us. So regulations aren't this sort of floating around evil thing. They're things that are very important to us and matter a lot. Next slide. Okay, so this is just kind of give you the general idea of what regulatory cooperation is. Again, this is an infographic from the Europeans. The idea is that after the trade agreement is actually signed, sealed, and delivered, it goes into effect. This regulatory cooperation body and a bunch of other committees within the trade agreement will live on. And in the case of the European Union, they're proposing this whole system where there'll be this sort of overarching body that includes both other governments, trade officials, as well as U.S., and they will get an early warning of proposed legislation and regulations that have trade impacts. And when you say trade impacts, what are those? Well, there might be things that prevent you from selling your chicken in the European Union, let's say, because it is processed with chlorine, which, by the way, our chicken is, and they have a rule that says we don't want to eat that chicken, you can't sell it here. Well, that is the kind of thing that would have a trade impact because you can't actually sell your product there. There would be ability for companies to get involved in this. They could pick out subjects that ought to have discussions about regulatory cooperation. And the goal is to come up with the same regulations between different countries. And not only that, but that those regulations will be the, quote, least trade restrictive. Next slide. So in essence, the goal here, at least from the corporate side, and they're very much in favor of it. In fact, the Chamber of Commerce and the Crop Life International, big pesticide organizations, they have their own regulatory cooperation proposals. But it really means deregulation, and it's about getting rid of these so-called burdensome, duplicative, divergent standards. What does that really mean? Well, when I think about duplicative standards that might be gotten rid of, I think about the recent Volkswagen scandal, where it wasn't the European Union which regulated Volkswagen that came out with information about the fraudulent activities and the basically lying about pollution caused by these vehicles. It was the California Air Resources Board, in large part, who came up with this and went after them, and they're the ones that are actually really have gone after them the most on this. So if you have harmonized regulations, or you say, well, whatever you did in the other country is good enough for us, then you miss out on that additional regulation, and that additional regulation may be the thing that really is important. Next slide, please. So just a really quick look. This is just the point I'm going to make here is just that this is all the groups that are lobbying on the TTIP. They're the same groups in the U.S. lobbying on TPP, and they're the same groups that are going to be at the table in regulatory cooperation after these agreements go into effect, which hopefully they won't. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about the TPP a little bit, because even though there isn't a regulatory cooperation chapter that looks like what I just described, there is a chapter called Regulatory Coherence, and there's also other provisions throughout the TPP that essentially try to do some of the same things that are proposed here, that were proposed by the European Union that I've been talking about. One of them is to have more impact statements before you can get regulations actually finalized. Whether they're needed, try to look at alternatives, look at their costs and benefits, determine whether you could have done better by actually having no regulation at all, or voluntary, voluntary regulation is really an oxymoron, but, whether there was some other way to do this that wasn't quite so much of an impact on trade. Next slide. And impact statements, we know from past experience in the U.S. Are essentially a downward ratchet. They make it difficult to get regulations through. They have the effect of overestimating the cost for businesses to comply with various requirements. At the same time, they underestimate what the benefits are for public health and the environment, partly because a lot of the information is in the hands of business themselves, and they call it confidential information. You can't actually get that information, partly because how do you put a number on what it means for someone to live with asthma their whole life or die of cancer? It's impossible to do, and when you put that money value on, you're basically underestimating what it really means. Next slide, please. So TPP, in its regulatory coherence chapter, also does have something about a central coordinating body. It is not so mandatory as what we see in the proposed TTIP with the European Union, but it does talk about having this overarching review of regulatory measures in all of the 12 countries. And so let's see what that might mean. Next slide, please. Okay, so right now in the United States, this is what it looks like to try to get a rule through, like a toxic chemical protection kind of rule. This is the state of Washington. As you can see, it's a convoluted process. There's a lot of notice and comment. There's hearings. There's, and it takes many days, months, sometimes years to get a rule through. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so at the federal level, that was from Washington State, by the way, and that's very similar to most states in the United States. At the federal level, there's something in the Office of Management and Budget. It's an office that is in charge of looking at regulations after they have been almost adopted. And this is perhaps what the U.S. is thinking about in the TPP when it calls for all the countries to have this centralized review of the benefits of rules and to try to coordinate them. And the question might be whether or not we're now going to see not only cost-benefit analysis, but this trade impact analysis. And I think one thing to point out about both cost-benefit analysis and trade impact analysis is if you're doing a regulation that's under, say, a public health statute, many of those laws do not actually require or even allow that you look at what is the cheapest regulation, the cheapest option for protecting public health. That may not be part of the mission of that law whatsoever. And certainly the mission of those laws do not include improving trade. That's not what they're about. So one of the biggest concerns here is that regulatory coherence and cooperation insert this overriding preference for free trade into laws and regulations that have nothing to do with it, but that are actually about protecting public health and the environment and consumers. Next slide. So I'm going to just zoom through this, but our experience with this Office of Management and Budget at the federal level is that it just it's bad. I mean, in 2013, half a year, there were 24 different reviews that took longer than a year to complete. Many took 2 years. Bills, regulations go into this office and they often don't come out. It delays them permanently. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So why is that? Well, for one thing, who's at the table? Once again, you see here the slide with the purpley blue color. That's where industry's at the table and nobody else is. So you can see that the same people that are pushing for TPP are the ones who've been at the table preventing regulations and will be at the table in the future with these ongoing regulatory cooperation forums. Next slide, please. And you also see that it's a downward ratchet. It makes regulations weaker. In here you see how reviews of EPA rules, 84% of the time those rules were sent back to EPA and changed. And they were not changed to make them more protective. They were changed in the opposite direction. And a number of them were withdrawn completely. Next slide, please. So that's this whole coordinating function in office. It exists right now, but under TPP, it's being encouraged to be expanded to look at trade issues and to be in other countries. In addition, the TPP has regulatory cooperation in other chapters that aren't called that. There's a section in this chapter called Technical Barriers to Trade. Technical barriers to trade are technical regulations. We would call them technical regulations that protect people, like, for example, toxic chemical regulation. Anyway, in that chapter, there's a specific provision that says federal trade officials are supposed to tell other countries that are part of the TPP if there's a state law or regulation that has a significant impact on trade. Like, let's say I was, trying to pass legislation on cleaning up air pollution in my state, or, having stricter mining rules in the state of Maine, which is a big issue in our state. That would be something that would have a significant impact on trade, no doubt, and that would be telegraphed to these other countries. And, of course, there's these forums with these large corporations that are trying to reduce these protections who will be part of that discussion, no doubt. In addition, the federal officials will be asked to engage in discussions with the other countries with the goal of harmonizing the U.S. and the TPP country standard. That is a process that there's no role for state regulators, yet this is where the regulation is coming from. And there's nothing in the TPP that preserves the rights of state governments to regulate and to go beyond weak and missing federal standards in many areas, which is very standard and is part of our U.S. Constitution that states have that authority. Next slide, please. So also in the TBT section, that's technical barriers to trade, language in that is all about emphasizing equivalency, least trade restrictive, and a focus on international standards, many of which are developed in these international forums that are pretty much industry run. And so, one of the big concerns here is that if you're harmonizing to this international standard, you're essentially setting what is now really kind of a minimum standard as a maximum standard or a ceiling. There's also language in the TPP that talks about prepackaged foods and limiting information about additives that are in those foods. It's special rules just for junk foods. And this is all of a piece we've heard from our friends in Peru and, in Chile. They had regulations last year trying to tell people about unhealthy junk foods. And there was a little warning label for things that had really bad, heavy on salt and sugar and things like that. And the U.S. used rules very similar to what is in the TPP to essentially, force or convince Chile to change their rules. And now instead of a little red stop sign, there's a little green light, or maybe it's a green stop sign, but you get the picture. Either way, it's not communicating quite the same message. And I think you all probably know about country of origin labeling. It's already been repealed, and that is something that was challenged under the WTO rules that are very, very similar to what's in the TPP. Next slide. So what's at risk? Not only federal standards, where actually we don't have federal standards on many of these issues, but also what's going on in the states. I mean, states are stepping into the void. They're passing legislation to label GMO ingredients in foods. They're looking at nutrition and calorie disclosures. They have they've proposed warning labels on sugary drinks in a number of states. And by the way, it's very popular. I just saw something on that. These are at risk because these are going to go beyond what is in federal law, and they're going to be viewed as not the least trade restrictive policy. Next slide. So just a quick picture of where GMO labeling has been under consideration or enacted. Next slide, please. So while we're on the subject of GMOs, I just thought I'd mention that TPP actually promotes biotech. There's a whole section that talks about, quote, trade in products of modern biotechnology, trying to encourage that. And again, looking at the regulatory cooperation approach, it will have a committee that will meet, that will discuss this, that will see if they'll come up with ways to encourage biotech. And one of the important things is this is in the market access chapter, not in the food safety chapter. And so it will be, the people that will be on that committee will be all about how to promote market access, and they won't know anything about risk assessment and science. Next slide, please. So TPP will also, in a very similar way, undermine regulation of toxics. Once again, toxics would be considered something that would be regulated through technical regulations, which is governed by the Technical Barriers to Trade chapter. So the same least trade restrictive language, and I think many of you know my state, Washington State, California, they have very comprehensive regulations starting to look at toxic chemicals and to regulate because it simply isn't being done at the federal level. Also, by the way, there's a special provision in TPP that looks just at cosmetics, and it says, and by the way, cosmetics aren't really regulated by the federal government right now, almost at all. So they're worried about somebody else regulating them and the federal government. So there's a special annex in there that basically makes it more difficult to regulate cosmetics and encourages only voluntary oversight. And you can bet that there was some, the whole cosmetics industry was involved in making sure that that got into the TPP. Little special interests everywhere. Next slide, please. So this will lead to, as I mentioned, downward harmonization on toxics, and both at the state and federal level. Next slide, please. And here's just my little map from Safer States, which tracks chemical action in the states, 250 laws and regulations in 38 states around the United States that have gone above and beyond what's in U.S. law, which, by the way, is pretty pathetic. The Toxic Substance Control Act, which does almost nothing. And that's why states have had to jump into the void, and that's a huge concern under the TPP and potentially the TTIP, that we will see these regulations being targeted for, quote, harmonization with weak international standards or weak federal standards. Next slide, please. Okay, so also at risk, just quickly, neonicotinoids, just another example of where state governments have gone ahead and tried to regulate bee-killing pesticides where the federal government has done very, very little. Next slide, please. And fracking. I mean, again, an area where the U.S. government basically doesn't regulate. State laws are definitely vulnerable to challenge, and you may know that there's actually a challenge to fracking regulation in the province of Quebec right now under NAFTA. That is under the ISDS provision. So, again, this is an area that could be targeted for, quote, harmonization. It could certainly be targeted as well under an ISDS case. And here you see a number of states that have not only come up with moratoria or a ban, but also, regulations around hazardous waste and other materials from fracking. Next slide, please. So just to sum up, the U.S. regulatory coherence agenda is a deregulation agenda. What we know from our past experience and what we expect to see in the future is delays, weakened standards, conflicts of interest, and more industry influence. And that is also the case with the European Union's proposal, and I know we're also busy with TPP, but the TTIP is a scary, scary proposal. And it is very much focused on regulatory changes because tariffs are pretty low right now. So keep your eye on that. Both the TPP and the TTIP promote these impact assessments. They promote harmonization and equivalency. And ultimately, they're promoting, ratcheting regulations down to the lowest common denominator. And both of them are going to increase corporate influence. Next slide, please. So here's some links. I just want to mention I wrote a really long paper with the Center for International Environmental Law for those of you who are focused on U.S. state impacts and also are interested in this regulatory cooperation issue. That goes into a lot of detail about what states can do on toxics and pesticides now and how it would be affected. And the other paper that I wrote is at the top, which is on food labeling on both the TPP and the TTIP, and that might be of interest as well. Next slide. So just have to plug my home state. This is a nice banner from the Maine Fair Trade Coalition. And if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, so we all want to be at the table. Next slide. And there's my contact information, and I'm on Twitter if you want to. I heard about Twitter at the beginning of the meeting, so you're welcome to follow me there. Thanks.
Sharon, thank you for that wonderful presentation. Liz, I still am not seeing anything in the Q&A queue. So, Liz, I'm going to ask you to handle the queue. There may be people who previously had questions. We're at 8:35. We can look at getting a couple of those questions in, and then we'll have people ask questions of Sharon. So, Liz, if you'll manage the queue for me.
Absolutely. What I'm going to ask everybody to do, because I do see some old numbers in here, I'm going to clear the queue and just ask anyone with a question for Sharon to please press *6 on your telephone. That way we'll know who's new. I'll just take a second for it to register for me here. So press *6 on your phone to ask the question for Sharon Treat. All right, we have area code 773-310-1231. Go ahead. Area code 773.
I guess you have to remember your phone number if you
hello.
want to be
Can
able to
you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Yes.
Hi. Okay, my question.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry?
Just state your name and where you are, and then your question.
Okay, I'm Bonnie from Chicago. So my question is, once this, I know there's different parts of how this TPP gets ratified. I think it has to go through the Congress, and then there's some certification process. But if that all happened, would there be any way that we could get out of this trade thing? Or once it goes through all the stages, are we stuck with it for, forever?
Is that a question to me?
Yeah, Sharon, I think that's a question for you. She's probably looking for a legal opinion.
Well, technically you're not stuck with it forever, but you have 12 countries that are party to it. And there's a docking aspect to the TPP, which means that other countries can join in after they have this big signing and if it goes into effect. So to get out of it, they're all going to have to unwind to that and agree to, to break it up. So, chances are that it's not going to happen. And certainly, changes that are suggested, aren't going to happen. And I think that's one of the major concerns about this whole trade deal. I mean, especially to the extent that it's putting legal standards and things that affect our ability to legislate on various issues. I mean, you can do bad stuff in a state legislature, and believe me, I've been there, and we have one right now that's, questionable in our state. But the fact of the matter is, ultimately, you should be able to elect some, straight-thinking people and reverse stuff fairly, at some point. And the problem with the trade deal is you can't. It's very difficult to do that. And there's this whole sort of ratcheting thing where each trade agreement builds on the other. So, for example, like that country of origin labeling that was overturned because of the World Trade Organization rules. Well, TPP is intended to go beyond those rules. And if you look at the language, it does go beyond those rules in terms of, being more, quote, trade, supportive or positive towards trade, which would be negative towards, upholding these public protections.
Thanks, Sharon. Okay, we've got a couple more questions that I think we probably have time for, and then we'll jump into the next place. Stoops 570, you're up at area code 908.
This is Hugh Campbell from Union, New Jersey. My question is for Nancy Price. Using the concept of a free trade zone that's usually done in a municipality, can that be considered in the 25 or so states, or at least some of them that have referendums, where we could get in on the November ballot the concept of a TP-free state?
Nancy, are you still with us, and you want to offer an opinion on that if you can speak to that?
I don't think Nancy is.
Yes, I'm here.
She's here. I just saw that she was muted. I had to unmute her. Go ahead, Nancy.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, that's a very interesting question. I think that getting a referendum on a state ballot is pretty labor intensive in terms of qualifying it, getting the number of signatures you need to qualify it, or going through the state legislature to get them to put it on the ballot. So I would suggest that needs to be investigated. I myself have not thought of that route, as we're sort of up against maybe timelines here, and so I think the resolution route is probably is quicker and more doable at this point. But I wouldn't rule out a referendum. But I just think we don't know when Obama is going to think or know that he's got the votes in Congress. So I think the resolution process is probably going to be more productive at this point. That's just my current response to your question. I'll give it some more thought. If we can delay, as long as we hope to delay, then maybe the referendum route might be a good one. But let's focus on resolutions now, get as many through cities, counties, and states as we possibly can.
Thanks, Nancy. Okay, David Sunnyborn's up, and Andrew, you can tell me how many more we have time for. David? You have the mic, David Sunnyborn. You with us, David?
I'm getting, okay, good. Okay, now you can hear me, right?
We can hear you now. I think you might have muted yourself. Go ahead.
Okay. So this is for Sharon Treat, who really supplied us with a masterful dissection of details that are scattered through the agreement. And my question is whether whether she or anybody else has developed very effective ways of actually reaching, I guess, the staffs of the Congress people. It's a lot of information. I do not believe that the legislators themselves are going to know that, are going to take the time and effort to understand those different things. So I wonder whether there are good sources of how to get to the staffs of the Congress people in an effective way where they'll really absorb the terrible details.
Yeah, well, I think for this regulatory cooperation issue, I think that a lot of the people who are focusing on this have really, it's more of a TTIP issue, I think, that, it's really come to the fore. And certainly on that, I work kind of virtually over the phone a lot with folks in D.C. who have been actually having a lot of meetings with staffers on the Hill to explain to them about this, because there's this danger, too. I'm really hopeful that we can get over the hump with TPP and kill it, but there's a real danger that you have folks in Congress that then say, but this European Union, that's fine, we like them, they have high standards, and, that's kind of irrelevant. It's really about dumbing down everybody's standards. So, yes, there has been that discussion. I think that what I have done, though, here is to try to, when I read through the TPP, I found a lot of stuff in there that incorporates a lot of these same regulatory cooperation provisions, maybe like regulatory cooperation light, but it's still there. And it is, I think, setting the stage for a more comprehensive approach to it in the next agreement. But, yes, there is some discussion there. The only thing I would say also is, the key to defeating TPP is going to be to pick off, members of Congress one by one that are on the fence. And the best people to do that, are people from the districts to come in with one or two key points and say, did you know it does this? And, I think that is going to be as important as individuals in Washington doing it.
Thanks, Sharon. Andrew, where are we?
One more question.
One more question. Okay, Mark Schaefer has a hand up. Mark, go ahead.
I have two questions, actually. One is
question.
Upward harmonization should be allowed, when necessary, rather than only this downward ratchet. And then the other is I posted on this article in New Scientist about totally antibiotic-resistant bacteria in China entering the human food supply and being detected in people. It seems to me insane to then ban country of origin labeling under those circumstances. Is there any recourse?
Yeah, I think that is very scary, and I don't know that there is a recourse to that, and not only do we not have country of origin labeling, but there's provisions in the food safety part of the TPP that are intended to prevent additional checks when stuff comes into the country. For the first time, a trade agreement has a special provision that it's going to allow exporters to essentially challenge the science behind, for example, an audit and a check of what's coming in. And there's some really good stuff by Food and Water Watch and also the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, both on it's called the SPS, or food safety section. So I think that's a very, very serious concern. We should worry about it a lot. And that's another reason just to kill these agreements dead.
Thank you so very much, Sharon. Liz, you're actually up next. And Liz, I'm going to apologize in advance. I was making dinner. I didn't get a chance to put your new slides up. So you got your old ones.
No, don't worry. They're great, and they take us where we need to go. So I'm just going to talk through a couple of things. Since we posted these trainings where we discussed globalization and training the trainers, my email box has been full of questions from people saying, what is globalization? What are you talking about? What about training trainers? What is this? I assumed a lot when I posted this. So let me just clarify real quickly. What we're talking about is providing a way to connect the dots for people between this economic process that is globalization and its byproducts and the vehicles, that help it happen. So if you actually register, if you click on the Action Network campaigns link, which is the first link in my slide, don't do it now or it'll take you right there, but do it after the call. It will take you to a page that kind of gives you an overview explaining how these things are interconnected. Globalization happens, but it doesn't just happen. It happens because we have provided the legal means for it to happen. And once it does happen, what it does is it takes on a life of its own. It creates a situation where corporations become stewards of the world and everything in it. Men and women become then a commodity. We are, simply a cost in the cost-benefit analysis of corporations. We cease to have rights, and we end up moving closer and closer to corporate rule, which is something that I think most people agree that they don't like. And it is a way to engage progressives. If you discuss corporate rule, we can get this message home and we can get more people to care about this. So I would encourage any community leaders working on this issue or TTIP or anything related to trade to take one of these trainings and get the materials so that you can conduct in-person training. Even if you don't have time to do them before the recess action, this is valuable information that you can use to educate your community and mobilize people for future action. It's just really good stuff, and it was created by the Common Sense Economics Department at the AFL-CIO. So you've got links to register for the trainings. I'm going to ask Andrea to now skip to the next slide for me. The Stop TPP events, because I'm going to skip ahead real quickly because I know everybody's got a lot to cover here. The AFL-CIO is doing fly-ins and a lobby Congress days. We're going to be in D.C. We encourage you to sign up. You can find information at our People Demanding Action campaign page. Also, Recess Week letter drops and select in-district action. One of the things that Sharon Treat talked about, which I thought was fabulous, it was a great lead-in, but we had another question in between where she talked about the best thing we can do is getting into the districts. As you all know, we've been doing these in-district letter drops, something that PDA led before People Demanding Action came on board and took it over. It's been very, very successful. It gives us an opportunity to educate our members of Congress, depending on the state in which you live and where your representative stands. You can just tailor your own message using the materials that we provide, but we would encourage people to sign up to become letter droppers. There's going to be a link, I think, on the next page, if I remember correctly. You can go to the next slide, Andrea. Yes, you can schedule your letter drop, and then you can report back to us on how you did. But really, this is the most effective thing. Getting in front of your members of Congress and either thanking them, persuading them, educating them, sharing information with them that they didn't know otherwise, and getting other people to do it with you, which is one of the reasons why we want you, the leaders of this movement, to get on these training calls so that you are prepared to bring lots and lots of other people along. That's how we grow this movement. Do we have time for questions, Andrea?
Yes.
Okay, because I think that is my last slide, isn't it? Or do I have another one?
Last slide.
Okay, so now we can any questions, and I can go. I guess I can go to my own, board and say we have hands up. I'm going to clear the queue. Anybody who has a question, and Andrea can tell me how many we have time for. I can just watch the clock. If you have a question about these trainings, the letter drops, or any of the recess week actions. One thing I did forget to mention to you guys. On the 3rd of February, there is going to be a petition drop in D.C. Many organizations are partnering, People Demanding Action, AFL, CIEL, Public Citizen, Citizens Trade, and others. So if you have petitions that you've been gathering signatures on, contact whatever group you're working with and try and support that action on the 3rd, which is actually the day that it's going to be signed in New Zealand. We lose a day, so it's actually the 4th in New Zealand, but it's the 3rd here in the U.S. that the president is actually going to be signing TPP. Okay, now we have area code 509989. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, this is Stacy Cossey in Spokane, Washington, and this may be review for other people, but I'd sure like to have a sense for the timeline of when President Obama signs it and what's our timeline of action.
As far as what we're going to do or everything that's going to happen?
For everything that's, not our timeline, but their timeline of when, it goes through Congress for vote.
Okay. I may defer to some of my fellow speakers in case I make a mistake here, but as I understand it, the president signs it, and then the clock begins. And there is a period of time where Congress then, once he actually asks them to vote on it, has to bring it to a vote. Once they bring it to a vote, assuming that Congress votes yes, we still have a dozen countries that have up to 2 years to ratify it in each of their respective nations before the entire deal becomes the rule of the land. Would anybody else like to offer a comment among our call team or speakers group? Because that is not something, I'm not the lawyer on this call, so I know Celeste Drake, if she were on the call, would answer it in a heartbeat, but if anyone else has a better answer for Stacey.
That's a very good answer. What we don't know is we don't know when the president is going to ask Congress to pass the implementing legislation. So the president will sign it, but it is really up to the president to determine when he is going to send it to Congress. Now, we've already heard that Mitch McConnell does not want his Republican senators and the representatives in the House having to run on a TPP vote. So we've heard that they could bring it up really early and try to ram it through while people are busy with the Super Tuesday primaries. That's been one scenario. We have also heard that it would be held until the lame duck. We don't really know.
Thanks, Andrea. As usual, my boss has the total story from the Hill. Okay, we've got a caller at 250-300-8400. Go ahead.
Good evening. I'm just wondering if any of the panelists would be able to describe how there may be some linkage between people who are looking at the fraudulent tribunals that govern the investment industry in North America. I know FINRA has looked at some of the traumatic abuse that's going on with regards to phony regulation that's basically providing insulation between perpetrators of fraud and clients of investment companies. is there a way that people who are looking at the TPP and its flaws could collaborate on looking at the whole issue of fraudulent regulation? And would that possibly?
I'm asking you. I'm trying to understand exactly what you're asking, because you're referring to fraudulent regulations, but I need something more specific. I mean, are you talking about the legal rules that enable Wall Street to do things that we consider immoral? I mean, is that what you're talking about?
I'm looking at some of the insurance councils and the securities commissions that are allowing files to be kept closed, even though evidence of violations of the criminal code are verified. Yet they still refuse to allow complainants to have justice through these tribunals. If we could get some way of showing what is going on in that area, it would. Okay, I think I know what you're saying, and I'm going to go ahead and stop you only because we have 3 minutes left on the call. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. We've got your number. If you're in the online meeting room, go ahead and send us an email. If you got an invitation to the call, send us an email at tpp@peopledemandingaction.org. I will forward your message to Lori Wallach at Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. It's a good question for anybody that's going to actually be studying, the increase of deregulation that is going to be a byproduct of these trade deals. We've got a lot of litigation right now under NAFTA that's happening, but basically what we're talking about is trying to, I think, take that which is legal and conform it to that which is moral. If I understand correctly, you're saying, hey, can't we do away with some of these unfair rather than fraudulent, I think, because they're not fraudulent if they're legal, but they're certainly unfair regulations that, protect Wall Street and investment banks and insurance companies and other people. And we can certainly forward that on to the folks that we know have the legal expertise to maybe give you some answers in terms of the kinds of things that you might be able to do. Andrea, do we have time for one more question?
No.
Okay, then I'm going to walk up. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we're already going to run a little bit over. We also have a number of actions that are being planned for February 4th. So I want to bring up another member of our call planning team, Mara Cohen, and have Mara walk us through what's being planned for February 4th. So Mara, go ahead.
Okay, hi everybody. I want to give you a little bit of information about the February 4th day of action. It's scheduled for, as Liz was pointing out, the day that the TPP countries, heads of state, including Obama, will be signing this trade agreement, which is really a treaty from our point of view, into he will be signing it for us to ratify. We see this, many people see this as a constitutional breach. And we want to point out that the president is signing something that Congress should be, but also just let everybody know what exactly we think of the heads of state signing the TPP. So we're looking for creative and actions or anything people want to do. You can flyer, you can have a march or rally, anything you're interested in doing. We have actions in over 25 cities on the map so far. You can see the map here. And if you are interested, you can put a map on, put an action on the map. You go to this URL right here, and you can get an action put on the map. The other thing is I can help you with getting flyers, issue-specific flyers, audience-specific flyers, more general education flyers, and also to get samples of event-specific flyers. So if you need flyers for your event and you need help with that, we can do that. We can help you get recruitment and media attention. So feel free to email me at marajai5 info@popularresistance.com or info@popularresistance.org. We will be mobilizing also during the President's Day of Action, Week of Action, President's Day Week of Action from February 14th to the 21st. That also includes Valentine's Day. I had somebody who was going to be able to talk a little bit about what they did last Valentine's Day in Chicago. It was a wonderful creative action where people created valentines with broken hearts for the way their congressperson had treated them during the fast track issue by basically turning code on them and voting for fast track when they had been working so hard to get him to vote against it. So we have those two actions coming up. Feel free to call or to email me, and I'll get in touch with you about how easy it is to pull an action off and help you on whatever step of the way you need help on. And that's all for right now. Thank you.
Well, we also want to invite people to join Popular Resistance on their next activist call. You can register at www.thetpp.org and then /National TPP Resistance Calls. All right. I'm going to bring up Adam to close us out and talk about future calls. Unmute yourself, Adam.
Yes, I am unmuted now. Sorry about that. Okay, great. So we have one call only scheduled at this point. We'll be announcing a new slate of calls shortly. But our next call is going to be a special call focusing on preparing for this the days of action around the signing. We'll be announcing special guests as the week progresses. We don't have that announcement ready yet, but you'll be hearing in the week about some special guest speakers. But the real focus of this call is going to be preparing for action, for taking action on February 3rd and taking action on February 4th. And hopefully everyone who attends this call will leave prepared to go out and let the world know on those days that we will not sit idly by while this attack on democracy progresses, and that while TPP may be signed on February 4th, we will do everything in our power to keep it from being implemented. So that's next Sunday, January 31st, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. You can register online right now at tradejustice.net/callreg, CALLREG, and we'll be having an announcement email going out later in the week where you can register there as well. So thanks, everyone, for joining us for this call, and please join us again next week.
I want to take a moment to thank all of the call hosts. I want to thank all of our guests, especially Sharon Treat. You were wonderful. It was an amazing, albeit somewhat depressing presentation, as dealing with this trade deal always seems to be. As Adam said, hopefully you will be able to join us next week. I am going to...
Your conference recording has stopped.
And I'm going to...
Q&A session is over.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night. Good luck. Good night.